Been through a lot of thinking. I don't know if you, I know Felix read the SOA article. I don't know if Stephen and Tim did. So anyway, I was thinking, I don't know if I want to jump into it yet, though I do want to get into predicates soon, but I was thinking more, what are my, on the one hand, my primitive schemas, and second, I want to dig more into the notion of lattice, because I think this is actually important. In an earlier, let me just look for my, yes. In an earlier version of my diagram, I put relations, equivalent, not equivalent, blah, 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 at the symbol level. And now we're speaking about these, a lot of these relations at the predicate level, so more at the thought proxy level. But I always said thought proxy is the equivalent class in symbols. So does that carry over well? And another thing I was, so that's my original relation. And I realized when I speak about the relationship between the a concept viewed as set theoretically as this is the range of the concept. This is all the cases that this entity definition encompasses, or this type definition encompasses. And when I'm comparing two of them more specifically, as such, I can think of four quadrants, right? There's this case belongs in the intersection, belongs in the difference on this side, difference on the other side, or outside of both. And I can note that there are cases, deny that there's any cases, or not be sure. So in theory, there's 81 possibilities of relationship between two concepts. Now that's, oops, we lost Stephen. Oh, wait, I'll wait 2 seconds in case he just comes back.
He said his battery died and he's back in. He's about to be back in.
Okay. But yeah, I'll continue. It will take a bit of a while, but it should go fast. So basically, if we forget about ignorance and just say ignorance is an absence of relation, though I'm a bit reluctant because sometimes it's claiming I don't know about this or I'm curious about this is useful, but let's not go there yet. So in theory, we have 8 relations, there is something, there isn't something in that quadrant. And really, we don't care that much about the outside, so we're down to 6. So that's manageable. Now, is the difference a bit too abstract for most people? Maybe they'll be more comfortable thinking in terms of containment. Is this contained in that? We can define one in terms of the other, but it is more possible to make incompatible statements when you deal with intersection and containment than when you deal with difference and intersection. So not so sure. But the other thing I checked is, can this be expressed in terms of lattices? Well, not easily, but yes. I started looking lattices with negation, but we don't even absolutely need to go there. We can express intersection, containment, difference as lattice meet and join equations. So if we ask people, is this contained in that, or is there something in this and not in that, which are intuitive, they correspond to lattice structure, which is good. It means that we can ask the lattice, we can ask people things that amount to lattice operators in more familiar terms. That's good. Now, the real question is, I was doing these lattice operations. Oh, so Stephen, while you were away, I was making the point that there's actually equivalence between containment and difference, which are, containment is the most intuitive operation, but even difference, which
Can you walk me through it? Can you give an example?
I could.
A short one?
Yeah, I can try.
I mean, if it's easy, it should be easy to give a short example, right?
Yeah.
Because you always jump over these things, so.
Yes, I do. That's the problem of being math trained. Prove or give or counter example. Yes. Examples have no value except pedagogical, and that does matter. Well, we had spoken about the example with animal, right? Is there, now let's start with different terms. Animal and mammal, is there an intersection? Obviously, yes. Cat is both a mammal and an animal. Is mammal contained in animal? Yes, there's nothing that is a mammal and not an animal.
Are we talking about entities now or claims? Because you're giving examples of entities. So are you talking about containment of entities?
I'm speaking about containment, that's a good question, of predicates as such, and the types derived from predicates. So do you see types as entities? Good question. Certainly in the fundamental concepts, the distinction between individuals and types is a fundamental distinction and something we need to be aware of. So whenever we're dealing with examples, we're dealing with individuals or even individual events. And the question is, does it fit a predicate or the type defined by a predicate? When I speak about containment difference, I'm kind of doing feature analysis. And so I'm speaking about types defined by predicates, absolutely.
But we are talking about argument modeling, so that's why I ask an example, because again, you're abstracting away a lot. Like, give me an example of a concrete case where you would talk about containment in the scope of argument modeling.
Well, the example we had last Wednesday was all animals have heart. And that's a claim. It's not an argument. We could go into an argument later. But it's false. It's false with the incorrect folk definition of animal as mammals, and it's correct of mammals. Obviously, all mammals have hearts, and it's incorrect with a correct definition of animal. The accepted.
Does this ambiguation matter here? I thought you were just trying to, so assume a correct definition for now. Like, let's say mammals, all mammals have hearts.
Yeah, then, well, the question is, okay, for example, I suppose I said all animals are mortal. I think that's actually an amusing example that I'm going to get into. We can reason with examples, and then we can say, well, actually, if you look at animals that undergo parthenogenesis, you can argue that the parthenogenesis is a form of immortality. And so there would be an exception between the the animal class and the mortal class. There's actually something in the difference. There are non-mortal animals. If you depending on a specific interpretation of parthenogenesis as immortality, which is defensible, I think. So here you're saying there's something in the difference between the mortal class and the animal class. There's something that is non-mortal, and or rather, the mortal class is a strict containment of the animal class. No, that's not true either. There is an intersection, but there's also difference. That's what I would say, really, on both sides. There are mortality applies to plants and all kinds of things. Is that?
But can you take this back to the realm of claims, because I'm lost. I think maybe I missed the context while I dropped out.
No.
I asked a simple question. Can you give me an example of containment? And meanwhile, we're 6 minutes further. So maybe
I gave the mammals are contained in animals.
okay.
That's an example.
Okay, so for instance, okay, yeah. So we're talking about not claims in this case, but entities.
Correct. Well, okay. My point is we're speaking about predicates, really. Containment of, do instances of this predicate are included in this one? And in that way, some people would even say that there's the same kind of thing as implication, because
okay, but so the context is that we're talking about formalizing claims further to like formalize the predicates or whatever you want to call it contained within, and at that point we're talking about containment and difference.
And it's true, something I haven't made explicit here. It's something that's very much high on my to-do list, but you're absolutely right, is I think often the containment hierarchy of entities induces a containment hierarchy of predicates and arguments. Like if I say all mammals have hearts, and the canidae or primates are contained in mammals, then I can infer that I can say that the all primates have heart is a substatement of all mammals have heart. It's a subclaim in this induced by the primate mammal relationship.
Yeah, but that assumes that is the only relation within that claim. If there's others like all mammals that are not XXX, then you also need to, I mean, you're basically modeling MOF exactly. So the claim to claim relation will only work if this is the only relation, and if the claims are exactly the same except for that entity, I'll call it, that you're modeling, and that entity holds that relation, then that assumption holds true. I see that. And in that case, formalizing the entity holds. But then, of course, if you're going to formalize all entities and include like negations and all that stuff, to which degree does that hold? Like
I agree totally. I agree totally. Not all claim relationships or even claim containment relationships are reducible to entity relationships, or even to maybe predicate relationship, I suppose. Yes, actually, I think they might always reduce a predicate relationship. But what is absolutely true that you pointed out separately.
I bring it up because of incremental formalization, right? But I think we, in the previous meetings, have somewhat established that we need some type of relationship between claims of containment or difference, if that's what you want to call it.
Yeah.
And now you're talking about entity containment. So my question is more, wouldn't it be more beneficial to first talk about on a claim level what that would entail before breaking that up? Because we know that we will need it on a claim level, that the current use cases show that we need something along those lines, whether it's these relationships or other ones we can talk about. Isn't that a good first step, or what?
That's a good question. And really it comes back to your question, are there claim relationships that are not entity relationships? And I said quite possibly, but now I'm thinking about it, and can I think of any? It
doesn't support incremental formalization. If all claim relationships need to be modeled as entity, predicate, whatever relationship, that means that you cannot say that a claim is more specific than another one without formalizing the underlying entities. Is that what you're arguing for?
I am arguing that it's the best way to do it, yes.
Okay, yeah. If that's your stance, okay, then I understand why you're taking this approach. Whereas my approach would be more like, well, people generally can very easily assess, like the example you gave, all mammals have hearts.
At the claim level.
Dogs have hearts, dogs are mammals, so yeah.
Yeah.
That I get.
I agree it can be done at the claim level. There's nothing wrong there. I do think it's useful to do it at the entity level because how should I put it? When you have a claim a bit in isolation, right? And you want to see, when you have two claims, it's easy to see the relationship. But when you have a claim in isolation, you're thinking, what other claims already in the system might it be related to? And identifying the entity is a good way to look at the subset of claims that share the same entity that I might want to compare it to. When you already have, okay, I'm comparing those two, that's fine. You don't need to go at the entity level. But here's a claim, and it's like there's already a million claims in the systems. Which ones are worth comparing? And going at the entity level, entity identification, I think, is the easiest way to pare that down.
Yeah. So yeah, we're talking now about what are the so that's, right, for this.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, I see a lot of so that's that you know, if we're doing bottom up, we aren't there yet, but since we're just talking in general, you know, one so that is, like I've said, you know, how do you, what is the unique key, that makes a claim canonical? That's one thing.
Yeah.
Another is, you know, how do you, we've talked about, there's a certain aspect of being able to auto-determine to some degree the relevance of a claim, meaning of an argument.
Can we take them one step at a time?
Yeah, it's gonna take a long time, but yeah, we can.
Yeah, it is. But
yeah.
Because I mean, I understand the argument that if you want a non-human determined uniqueness for claims, that you of course need to formalize the claim in its entirety. You have to mold it entirely. But I mean, this implies that it's not humans determining identity of claims. And my point would be that, well, the only feasible way to do it would be to let humans define the identity of claims. In other words, determine whether or not they're unique. In other words, deduplicate them. Because the alternative would be fully formalizing them, which.
Well, no, I see it as incremental as well, because
it could help,
you know,
in the process.
Like we know that we're going to have essentially an explosion of claims, and there's going to need to be tools that help manage that, right? And it's. You know, a simple example would be you're filling out a new claim and it's seeing what you're typing in is saying, did you mean that? Did you mean this? Is this claim already exist? Right. So there could be kind of look ahead tools that help you from duplicating a claim when you first go. And it can do that just on words, or it can do that based on similar concepts. You know, the more you define something and the more somebody's sophisticated at using it, you might want to be attaching definitions as you go. The more it can help.
Yeah, but it's a different use case. I mean, I understand.
It's a different use case, but I'm saying
what you said before is that it can identify. What you're saying is now it can help to identify, whereas now you're recognizing that it's still the individual, the human, that does the eventual identification of the claims, but
no, but there's an automated part.
Can help the user in like doing that.
Yeah, it can help the user. And you know, when I say that, like, what is a primary key of a claim, it would be interesting to note that if you're going through the process of specifying, of increasing or disambiguating a claim, right? So you're going through and now you're adding some disambiguations. As you're doing that, the system might find overlaps and say, oh, this is a collision with this. Did you know this claim already exists? Or did you mean it's something different from that? So it's a helping tool. Yeah.
And the partial formalization is really important here, actually, because, for example, the first step is identifying some entities. And that restricts the number of claims you have to look at. And as you say, oh, moreover, these entities are in this relation. And then you've really got it down, but you're much closer to full formalization. But maybe, for example, the relation, you used a very vague upper level ambiguous relation, and then the system can tell you, well, these are more precise relations that have been drawn between those entities, which one do you mean, and blah, blah, blah.
Specific, right, the general to specific aspect of these debates, right? For one thing, you need this relationship in some way between entities, right, or predicates.
Yeah.
But the second part is then when you're making an argument that, you know, okay, here's a study in Texas of immigrants or whatever, right? And you're going to make it an argument and you want to apply it to the top level one. If you have this series of general to specific, having the entities defined can help kind of direct, well, why don't you make the argument over here? Because this would be the best match for the entities you've defined.
Yeah, and that way, I agree with what you're saying about the primary key, but the point is the formalized or semi-formalized argument has a bunch of keys for each entity identified. So we can query by entity or by even various predicate or superclass of entities, so that they should be in text in a way that includes all these, so we find those statements.
And the navigation, you know, navigation is another case where, like you said, recommending similar or just following through some sort of pathway on the lattice towards some other claim. But another one that we've talked about before that has to do with organizing the arguments themselves is, you know, your example of, you know, mammals have hearts, or you know, animals are mortal, and therefore mammals are mortal. There's the sets, you know, when you know that there's a set and an argument applies to the set, you know that it can also apply to the others. And do you need to duplicate that argument, or can you just kind of make the argument once and it apply? For example, when it's a numerical range, you know, and the cost of a lockdown is 1 trillion. Well, that argument applies for a certain set of claims, including like the cost is going to be at least 100 billion, and is an argument against the other remaining set, right? The non-include.
I agree totally. I'm thinking more and more that we have kind of two separate cases in the inclusion department. I think they're both inclusion and they're fundamentally the same, but there probably will be modeled differently. Like inclusion in the ontological sense, where, you know, set subset and class subclass, and inclusion in the range of values sense. They're both inclusion, and I was arguing for there's something fundamentally common to both of those, but I think there will also be specific mechanisms. But certainly the notion that when you have a predicate with a literal value, then you can query that predicate, so to speak, with the literal value. And if the literal value is a range, then you get query predicate containment induced by the range containment. And that's a special case of set containment, which is in some ways specifically different from the ontological subclass containment. But anyway, that's a bit of a detail, but yes, absolutely. It's a case, it's an important case. Now, the question I was asking, and really the one I'm still running through my head, is originally I had said, oh, we're doing these on the symbols because that's what we have, right? And meanings and accessible, blah, blah, blah. But on the other hand, when what I proposed Tuesday is actually the fundamental operation when creating the lattice is saying it was based on a single term. It could be based on different terms. That doesn't matter so much. But here's a meaning, and here's distinct subcases, which are guaranteed to be, there's a non-empty difference. There's at least something which is here and there. And these, the meat, the common super concept may or may not be named by the same name as the ambiguated. Like, does it make sense to speak of Paris as this common concept to Paris city and Paris hero? No, nobody would say Paris and mean both. They mean either. Whereas in other cases, when I speak of, say, a very abstract notion like capitalism, there's many people have different ideas about exactly what characterizes capitalism or authoritarianism and different determining features, but it makes sense that when I'm speaking from about roughly all of them, and it's not important to my argument to specify which set of defining characteristics I'm referring to until it comes up. But being is all of the above a meaningful concept. And so I'm saying, if this act of saying, here are two distinct concepts with the common concept above them, and in some cases, defined by a common name, that's the case of disambiguation. In some cases, the name doesn't correspond to a concept, that's another kind of disambiguation. That's very much at the term level, but on the other hand, it's at the meaning level, because we assume we have some kind of definition to distinguish them. Formal or informal, it can be a textual definition, it can be predicates, ideally predicates, of course. Now, when we do this about different terms, which we have not defined yet, we're saying, okay, these two terms are different, these two terms are equivalent, these two terms are not equivalent, this term is contained in another. We presumably assume that these terms are not ambiguous and that they're disambiguated, and that we're really making a statement about those terms' meanings, not the terms as symbols. And that's where I want to go. When we're saying, this is contained in that, this is equivalent to that, what happens if those terms have been disambiguated? Will we force disambiguation? And I think we should, given that the meat is not materialized. That is, the join is not meaningful. If the join is meaningful, it's fine. But if the join is not meaningful, then I think we should force disambiguation. And that way, everything I had as a symbol relation is actually at the meaning level. And so the whole lattice is at the meaning level, which is what we want ultimately. But we can do it through symbols, except we'll have to ask people to disambiguate when appropriate. Does that make sense? Sorry,
I think I get the gist of it. It's the same we talked about last meeting, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to be more formal about it, about what's, and sorry, I like diagrams, but basically I'm saying the symbol relation attaches to the thought proxy, or using, where's that one? Yes, this one. Okay, this one is now to, it's being a bit polluted by restriction and distinction. I should have the original one without it. But the symbol relation almost always attaches to the claims. But then it's a bit different, because we need to have this thing that says, well, those two symbols are equivalent. They form a claim. So that's a bit of the synonymy is a bit of a different thing. Is a bit of distinct. So take synonymy apart, which can be materialized as a symbol relation or just materialize in the structure of the claim as here or as here, but take every other relation and make it happen at claim level, which means we have to do it as a whenever there's a disambiguation link, we have to traverse it. And I guess my next step is to have a class diagram form of the disambiguation, the symbol relation disambiguation. And the symbol relation disambiguation is now in a way a bit richer. Do I still have it? No, damn it. But it's about saying, no, it wasn't there, sorry, didn't write it down. But basically it's about saying, here are two concepts, they have their own definition, maybe formal definition. There's an assertion that there's symmetric difference, there's a non-empty symmetric difference, or there's an assertion of one of those or many of those containment characteristics. And if there's a distinct meet, it's possible. If there's containment, there's no distinct meet, right? The meet is one of the terms. Sorry, distinct join. If there's a distinct join, does it bear the same term as the disambiguated terms? I should write that as a class diagram, but basically this is what I'm saying is one of the fundamental operations about this between as how we construct the lattice from assertions on statements. Okay, let me be more formal because I'm handling too much. Actually, I should just go there.
Yeah, just walk through an example. I mean, be less formal, I would say, just be more concrete.
Okay, fair enough.
And write the example down as you go, it also helps. Otherwise, you have to hold in short-term memory.
No, I'm sure. I'm thinking about what. What else did we have? We had another one that was interesting.
Just take one.
Well, they show different things, right? Because in the case of well, let me write below here.
Well, there is, if you refer to the name Paris or the noun Paris.
I just wrote reference to symbol.
Yeah, exactly.
The symbol is distinct. The symbol is not the thing.
Yeah, but I mean, okay, never mind.
No. Very good point. I mean,
if you have a claim, there are 10 things called Paris. I mean,
Yeah, that's a perfectly valid claim, but this claim is not.
It's a
it's-
contrived example, but it's just a counterexample of what you just wrote.
No, that's. I would claim it isn't, because you're making a claim about Paris, the symbol, and its reference hold, but you're not that much speaking about what do all those 10 things have in common. You're just saying the symbol, which is distinct from either the person or the place, it's a third entity, and what is the cardinality of its reference set, which again has nothing to do with, but there's no like and here plausible is hand waving a lot, right? I mean, could I imagine a case where I say Paris and I mean all of the above? No, I can mean the set of all of the above, but that's a distinct thing. Can I mean either of all of the above? Dubious. Whereas when I speak of, I gave the example of.
So in short, when you say reference to the symbol, that's the use case you mean?
Say that again?
When you write reference to the symbol is distinct, that's what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. And distinct from what?
The symbol is distinct from the thing. Paris, the name, is distinct from Paris, the hero, or the city. The symbol Paris is not the same as what it refers to. Basic edge in the semiotic triangle. They're not the same. And when you say there's 10 things called Paris, you're speaking about the symbol Paris, its reference space, but you're not using the reference space as and then the cardinality of its reference space, but you're not using, this is something true of all things in the reference space other than the name, which is a tautology. As opposed to the case where I'm saying, I'm trying to find an object, a good example of real ambiguity. Well, animals is not such a great case because the animals, mammals is such a.
Never mind. I think you can leave it.
No. But I'm trying to find a good example because it's important of an underdefined terms of a real ambiguity, right? Where it makes sense to be vague. Like I gave the example.
That's any abstraction. It's any useful abstraction.
Yeah, pretty much. Number.
Mm-hmm.
When I say numbers are well defined, do you mean natural numbers or integers or complex numbers? Well, they're all well defined, doesn't matter. Yeah, actually, I think I'll take this one.
Yeah, Math uses numbers. You don't really care which numbers.
Yes. Numbers are well defined in set theory. I'll take this one. And here, it could be N, it could be R, it could be C. It doesn't matter. And being ambiguous about it is perfectly fine. That's a good example where number could mean any or all of the above, right? Any or all of those more specific options. And that's what I mean by here the join is the join is defined. The disambiguation, one of the options of the disambiguation page in this case is don't bother to disambiguate. It's a valid choice in this case.
Oh, it depends. It depends. That's the whole "it depends" scenario where if you're adding an argument that relies on a more specific interpretation, it depends.
Of course.
But I really don't think we need to go deeper into detail of this because again, this is what we've been talking about for 3 meetings now. So.
Yeah. Okay, no, but you asked me to give examples. I was willing to gloss over and go on to the next one.
With an emphasis on short.
Yeah, well, it takes time to come up with examples. But what I was saying, and because I don't think we covered this in the last 3 meetings, is any case where we say this concept is a subset of that concept. If there's ambiguity about either of the concepts, we will probably ask to disambiguate because we cannot leave those relationships, this is the same, this is not the same, this is a subtype, blah, 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 on the term alone, because the term is ambiguous. It has to be the term as it refers to one of the possible meanings. That was my point, really.
Yeah, and then you say that means either saying it's the meat, I don't know, last meaning you call it the meat, or it's the most specific one.
Yeah.
But you can't leave it undefined.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
I think that makes sense.
So that's my one of my epiphanies of the day. And the other thing I've been trying to do is to be more systematic about, okay, so we have this lattice of concept. Okay, that's fine. Now, what are the schemas I'm building from those, right? I kept saying, oh, I want causal claims, I want epistemic claims, I want to distinguish them. What are the components of these things, right? What are the entities in my entity graph, and what are the claims, and what are the so I did say there's such a thing as predicates and individuals. That's a real distinction. I'm not sure if hypothetical individual are distinct or not. It bothers me a bit. Like if I say there's a unique X such that something, I think there's an individual there, but I don't know who it is, you know, as in when you do a judicial action against an unknown person. There's somebody who did this necessarily. Well, our Nakamoto example, right? There's somebody who wrote that paper, possibly even a group, but let's forget that part. We don't know who it is. So there's the hypothetical individual.
But why would you, okay, what's the use case? What's the so that of this whole 125 line?
Sorry, this is starting at 125. What I'm trying to do is to see what are the building blocks of the claims.
But why are these building blocks needed? Like, why do you need to disambiguate between a predicate and individual and a hypothetical individual? I mean, yeah, you can argue at great length, you can, I know, but we're not modeling the world, we're modeling something that's useful in argument modeling. We're talking at least about something that's useful in argument modeling. So what is the so that in case in the context of argument modeling? For
claim signature, I'm totally here taking a page from Tim's book, so that I have unique claim signatures. So I need to.
Why do you need to know it's a hypothetical individual versus a normal individual? Why does it matter?
Because part of the process will be. I'm still hesitating on that one, to be honest. But I think it will matter for variable unification when I'm. Is it a variable or a constant? Is it when I'm unifying variables, if it's a hypothetical individual, I'm not sure that I unify them exactly the same way, but I'm still thinking about that.
But take my Adam Weishaupt example. You would say that's a physical, real individual, George Washington. And yet you find out later that George Washington was replaced by Adam Weishaupt from the Illuminati. That, you know, you've classified him as an individual, and yet it turns out he was hypothetical because it was somebody else playing the part of George Washington. So, you know, I'm not sure we gain anything by making this distinction. It's just the point is, you know, and I didn't see the end of the video either, but we were talking about on Wednesday, is a definition a claim, or is a definition something that you make claims about or that has claims attached to it? And the question is, you know, then what happens when one of those claims becomes invalidated? How does that affect? And I think that's what you're getting at here in terms of use cases, is how does that affect claims that used that definition if suddenly a claim about the definition or the definition itself is somehow invalidated. Right?
Affecting what in terms of soundness, or what are we talking about?
And I'm not yet sure about that either, because I know that there's a time component here where you can come back and, oh, it turns out everybody found out that George Washington was really Adam Weishaupt, and you come back and look at all the claims in which were made about George Washington, and somebody can come back and say, well, now that definition was wrong and George Washington didn't do that because he was already dead or something. And that is something that can be done through regular argumentation structure. So from my opinion, that hasn't fully been clarified yet.
And by the way, I don't think it's been clarified yet on my point either. I'm still trying to determine so that this is work in progress, the hypothetical individual, but certainly the predicates, individuals, relations are fundamental building blocks. Hypothetical, I spoke many times about the difference between a definite and indefinite article, and this is what I'm driving up.
Okay, what's the use case of individuals? Let's do them one at a time. Like, why do you need to differentiate in an argument model between an individual versus a chair?
That's
concept of a chair. Why does it matter?
Yeah, concept of a chair versus a specific chair, right? The specific chair.
Is an individual also a specific chair?
Yes.
Okay.
A specific chair would be an individual. Yes.
Okay.
It's types versus classes. It's a difference between subclass and instance of. In Peircean semiotic, they called them what is it again? Type and I forgot. Damn it.
Okay.
Anyway.
So not okay. So that's what you mean between. Okay. So what's the use case of the difference between defining a clause
singular
and
versus
dividing
plural
individuals?
It's about when you're dealing with an individual, and especially a quote unquote definite individual, how should I put it? An individual endures in time in a way a class doesn't. So different predicates may be true about the individual at different times.
I think the same also for concepts. Concepts change over time.
The definition, okay, which definition is used for a term in a given changes over times and communities? Yes, that was the meta claim we were speaking about earlier, the meta assertion. This definition is canonical in this community, and I will add at time X. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, I don't know if this is part of it, but one of the examples that we had about Satoshi was, like Satoshi, what was it? Satoshi is obviously against or doesn't care about environmental concerns. And so depending on whether Satoshi we're talking about as a single person or was a group of people, what happens if you make that claim and Satoshi is one person? That Satoshi Nakamoto obviously didn't care about environmental concerns, right? And so, one person is taking Satoshi as a single individual and is saying that it's because the design of proof of work wastes electricity, right? And it was okay. But then somebody else comes and proves that Satoshi was a group, a collective of people. And one of the people in that collective was writing papers and concerns about this future problem. And other people in the collective said, that's going to be a problem. We'll fix that when we get there. Let's start with this and then we'll fix it later. Then essentially, because of membership within a group, it just complicates that entity, Satoshi, and whether or not Satoshi cared about.
But that's argumentation. I mean, if you just disambiguate between the two, like with a basic building block where you identify entities, one is the group, the other one is a person, then you can argue about specific claims and you can model that in an argument map. Why? The only reason still, each time I hear all of these more and more formalized stuff, it's to implement solvers to derive a conclusion. to
I'm
derive
with
the
you.
truth.
I totally agree with your concern.
Mm.
And I would also be fighting against this if I had a clear view on this.
So
yet, but
if
I'm
that's
just
the use
studying
case,
the
you
idea.
automatically
Yeah.
determine that some arguments are false, and then I'm against it, because that's not my goal. I want to model arguments and I want the humans to interpret them. I'm not writing a solver. I just want to model argumentation.
Right, but the example that I gave is a real world argumentation example. The question is, does our model solve it? And I think what you said is, yeah, it does. And there's another question, which is there a better way to solve it? I'm not talking about as a solver, but a better way, just like how having relationships between entities helps solve the problem of the explosion of arguments and copy paste of arguments. You know, is there something in here that might solve another problem? And I haven't fully analyzed that.
Exactly. That's a question.
Yeah.
What's to show that in terms of argument modeling? And the
No,
example you just gave was not that. I mean, it's an argument to say we need to be able to identify different entities, whatever those entities are, groups or individuals. I'm on board with that. But I'm not on board. That was where this discussion started, with disambiguating between predicates, individuals, hypothetical individuals. I mean, for each of these, I'd like an argument, an actual use case. Right.
And you know what? I even agree with you. I'm still trying to see what do I need, and this is what came to mind first. But I think the distinction, it might be possible to do without the individual predicate distinction, in the sense that obviously you can model individuals as predicates. That's clearly true. The question is, do you gain anything by separating the case of individuals? You get kind of cases of distinction for free. I think it might have impact on the signature. The real reason that I suspect there's something there. You think about predicate equality. Like, are those predicate equality? Well, is there something in the symmetric difference, right? Is not the way you think about individual equality.
No, it isn't. Okay, maybe I'll let you continue, but
no, that I'm almost done. No, I mean, I'm done on that one. I think that
I understand that that's true, but again, it implies that you want some formalized mechanism of identifying the signature. And as I said before, I think that will always remain a human action. And yes, I agree, you can formalize more in order to give hints to the user to say, hey, this is probably the same or this. But I don't think the final signature will ever be determined or can be determined in an argument modeling tool by the computer.
I even agree with that. But I'm saying we can do a lot. The more we do, this is asymptotic, right? The more we do on signatures, the more we gain in terms of helping the users.
True.
And so for me, anything that contributes to signatures is useful. But you're right, there's a cost-benefit analysis to be done, and that's why I'm not 1000% that it's worth it in this case, distinguishing individuals and predicates.
So to come up with a valid use case, you'd have to come up with like in which cases the user need help making an easier distinction.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was saying. The way you think about, is it the same predicate? The questions I would ask a user in the case of predicates are not the same questions I would ask a user in terms of, is this the same person? And that would be my justification for having them separate. My main justification so far for having them separate.
That would make sense, but I'd like to hear an example and the questions you would ask differently then.
As I said, in the case of predicates, I would say, do you have a counterexample of an individual that fits in this class and not in another, right? That's an empirical justification of disjointness. Whereas if you think...
That's not an example, it's an abstraction again.
No, it's not. It's what I would ask a user.
Yeah, but it's an abstract example of what you would ask a user. It's not a concrete example.
No, no. I would pretty much ask those exact words.
In what
context?
You're talking abstractions, Mike Antoine. There's no claim the user is not seeing anything. You're talking about an abstract thing you would present to the user, but there's no concrete thing that the user is seeing right now.
Okay, well, let's go back to our example of ambiguous concepts. We said Paris. Oh, do you mean Paris the city, or do you mean Paris the hero? Well, now in this case, it's an individual. So that's no. I want a class example. Do you mean autocracy as defined by
we have
Hannah
numbers,
Arendt?
right? Yeah.
We have numbers. Yeah, it's going to be easier than autocracy. Do you? Damn, I like bringing Hannah Arendt in there. Do you mean complex numbers, or do you mean natural numbers? And is there a difference? And well, yeah, I is a complex number, but not a natural number. So there's a difference.
But isn't complex numbers in itself an individual?
No, it's a predicate. It's a class.
Depends on how you see it.
Yes. Okay. That's the Platonician interpretation, right? Do predicates define individuals? Yes. What do you have to say about that, Stephen?
Sorry, I was reading Tim's message.
Oh.
Maybe we can finish up this example and probably stop as well for today. But it makes sense to go walk through this example, I think. Can you ask a question again? Timothy had a hard stop, so he had to leave.
No. The question Felix asked, perfectly valid. Are complex numbers an individual? And I said, well, the Platonician interpretation, any class is an individual. And I'm not a Platonician, I guess, in the sense that classes are not individuals, in the sense that they're characterized, their characterizations, they're not characterized by their characteristics, by their characterizations.
Would one
characterizations themselves?
Would the number one be an individual?
Yes. Absolutely.
Are you sure? Because couldn't you be talking about the natural number one and I mean?
Oh yeah, it's an individual that happens to belong in many classes. It's
yeah, but
valid...
if you say one, isn't it which one do you mean?
Which one?
Yeah. Which one do you mean?
Okay, yeah. Is the question you're asking is the natural one the same as the complex one? I would tend to say yes, but that could be debated, yes. Certainly the representation will be different in different systems. So that's a good point. If I represent it as a float or as an int, it's not the same one. At the bit
these
level.
cases can like almost every individual be interpreted as a class as well? Then
I'm a bit, is that a different representation of the same individual? No, that's a good philosophical question. Is the individual class representation solid? I tend to think it is, but it's perfectly arguable. In a way, I'm a class of all the states I've been, right? As a person, I'm the name of all the individuals I've been at all moments of my life.
But to come back to the use cases, because already philosophically speaking, it's a difficult question. That much is obvious.
Yes.
Practically speaking, can we delineate is the next question, and if so, how do you do so? And then the original question was, in what's the use case for doing so?
No, you're absolutely right. The ship of Theseus shows that it's hard to delineate. That's absolutely so. Maybe the difficulty of delineation is a good reason not to have the distinction, but that bothers me because I really want to ask different questions for classes and individuals. But it's true that individuals.
But in the case
it may be a role, yeah.
In the case of classes, the use case you seem to have was like, you use this symbol. That symbol refers to a predicate, so you're listing all the different. well, to a class, so you're listing all of the ontology basically of that symbol, if you will, of that predicate in case it is, that's the use case. So you're basically disambiguating is the use case here. What's the use case? How is that different in the case of individuals?
Okay, no. That what you what you just described is something I would do either for an individual or a class. By the way, I could ask for
yeah, but that's my point. That's my exact point.
Yeah, but that's not how I was differentiating them. The case I was differentiating is if I have two classes and I'm wondering are they the same or not, I will ask, is there an individual fitting in the symmetric difference? Because there is.
But in which use case do you end up in? When you're constructing the ontology, or okay, what's the user doing right now that you're asking this question?
The user is saying, oh, you define this way, I would define that way. Where are those definitions concretely different? As in, is there something that would fit in that definition and not in this one? Is there a real difference between those definitions?
So
or
the use case is while introducing definitions, basically, or while adding entities, if you will. Yeah.
And is there a real distinction between the way you say it and the way I say it? And in particular, is there an empirical case that falls under one definition and not the other? Is there a real an empirical difference between those two?
Isn't it the same almost with individuals? I mean, okay, so in the case...
No, there's not sub-individuals of individuals. You can say, are those two individuals the same? And no, because they don't have the same social insurance number, which is a defining predicate, right? And you can speak about defining predicates of the class. But here, you're not just saying they're not the same defining predicates, but this is a defining predicate with a concrete sub-instance. There's actually an instance that falls under this predicate and not under that one, which is a meaningless question for an individual. You can say, are they different value of identifying predicates? Or are they different values of
none of these questions will ever be asked to users, because then nobody's going to use it. So let's again take a concrete example, right? So you had the what is a concrete example for an individual where you would ask concrete versions of those questions you just said?
Well, okay, we have all those arguments in the US about this is socialism. Okay, how do you define socialism?
It's a class, right?
Yeah, socialism is a very abstract concept. It's a predicate. And how do you define socialism? And what are the features of socialism? Or there's these lists about features of authoritarianism. And was the Trump administration authoritarian according to this definition or that definition? Or is the Obamacare socialism according to this definition or that definition? Those are the kind of real arguments happening with real users and asking, how do you define socialism? And does that make this government socialist? And what happens to this concrete case? Or can you name a non-socialist government according to that definition? Or can you name, can you give me an example of, as you keep doing? These are the kinds of questions we'd ask users very much. And I'm saying in the case of a class, I will ask, can you give me a concrete example of something that is not socialism or not authoritarianism or blah, blah, blah. Those are questions I'll ask. Or something that is socialism according to your definition, that is not socialism according to that definition. I would ask those questions to a user. And yeah, these are the kinds of questions I'm talking about here.
In order to pinpoint a specific entity, sure. But how, again, is that different from what you would do with individuals?
In the case of individuals, I would ask, are those two people the same person? Like, let's take the...
why these two people? Why wouldn't you just say, is this individual, like you say, what are the features of socialism? Would you say, what's the social identity number of the individual? How is it different?
Yeah, well, are we speaking about the same, let's take an ambiguous name. Are we speaking about the same John Smith? John Smith committed this crime. Are we speaking about the same John Smith? Then.
So what are
we
the
don't-
types of questions you would ask? You would still be, in order to pinpoint a specific entity that they're talking about, you would be asking questions. So why do you see that, that these features are necessarily different?
Because, okay, in the case of an individual, what will differ is the value of a differentiating characteristic. In the case of class, if you say, oh, this defining characteristic is different between our two definitions, it does not mean that the set are disjoint. It's the difference between set by comprehension and set by intention. You can have two sets with the different intentions and the same extension. So I will further ask, okay, you have a different intention, you have a different defining characteristic, but is there a counterexample of something that fits in this definition and not in that definition? And that is something I would never ask about individuals.
Yeah, so the use case is when people are trying to differentiate two different concrete entities.
When they have different definitions for, it can be the same term or it can be two terms. And the question is, are those definitions, which are formally different, do they correspond to something different in the real world?
Yeah.
And is there some, as I keep saying, is there something in the symmetric difference?
So then the first operation you would do is you would ask, is this an individual or a class or what? So you only have the symbol, you only have the text, like you have no information. The first operation you would ask, like, are you referring to an individual? And then you have to explain to them what an individual is, or is this a class?
I don't know if that's how I would do it. I'm saying those are fundamentals entities for me. The order of asking these things I haven't determined yet. So
okay, but then you assume they're already there. So they're already different.
No,
you already know that it's either an individual.
No. That is not what I'm saying. I'm saying.
Then I don't get the use case. If the use case is to differentiate them, at what point of differentiation do you start?
Sorry, Stephen. I think the fact that I don't have it yet doesn't mean I cannot have it. I think that sounds a bit deliberately obtuse.
No, but I'm asking for the example you're giving.
But I'm saying I don't. I'm saying I have the example of asking. It's true. In the examples, I presuppose I knew. Now, if I don't know, what is the order of asking?
No, but you already know. So you already know they're different. You already know you have an individual. So it's already modeled. That's the assumption right now, because that's seemingly what you were implying before.
Yeah. Then in that case, yes, I would ask, how do we know it's the same person? Or normally I'll ask, okay, you're speaking about John Smith.
But you already know that it's the individual with.
I know it's an individual. Okay. You're speaking about John Smith committed this crime. We already have arguments about John Smith. Is it the same person? That's probably what I would ask the person. We already have. Yeah.
And you know it's an individual, so you can show whatever that however you store an individual.
Yeah. I have, here's other arguments I have about John Smith. Is it the same John Smith? Here's other claims about John Smith. Is it the same John Smith? That's what I would ask first in the case of an individual.
And you start with just the text John Smith in this case, right?
I suppose all the user has given me is John Smith. I somehow know that this is an individual entity, maybe because I know that John Smith is always used for individual entities or not. That's I'm hand waving here. But suppose maybe I will ask, is that an individual? But maybe I don't care. Maybe I will just say, this is John Smith. I have references to John Smith in the database. They all happen to be individuals, but Is it the same individual? Or maybe it's not even an individual, it's a class. Oh, it's not the same individual. Then maybe I'm more curious, oh, is it another individual or is it a class or is it, because I don't know, right? I know it's not the one I have. Is it someone else? What kind of entity is it? Is it also a person? I may assume, you know, John Smith was used for a person last time. Is it another person or is it something entirely different?
Okay, let's. I mean, none of this convinces me that they're different, or that in order to implement any of the UX you're talking about here, you would model them any different than just entities that have the defining characteristics. As
well, because we only
and you just ask for the defining characteristics, whether it's an individual or not. If you have an entity and you define it indeed with a social ID, then you'll ask, hey, here you have an entity with the same text.
Because we took the individual case. Now, if we go to the class case, you tell me something about numbers, and I'll say, oh, we have all these facts about numbers. Which one do you mean?
You can see all the different ones that are there, and in order to filter further, you could filter based on defining characteristics, whether or not that's a social ID or whether or not that's a epistemological mindset, whatever.
Exactly. And if you say, oh, none of the above, this is really the interesting case. No, it's not natural and it's not rational. Okay, what is it? It's real numbers. Okay, how are real numbers a superset, subset? I would ask that actually. Oh, it's a superset. And okay, how are they disjoint? Do you have some, can you tell me something that is a real number that is not a rational number? Yes, fine. Okay, thank you. We know it's a strict superset. Thank you.
Who would ask those questions?
The system would ask those questions. I think it's like, if you tell me the real numbers are disjoint things, I think they're not the same as rational. Okay, so you're proposing a new entity and it's a superset of an existing entity. To know it's a superset, do you have what are the, I could ask for, you know, what are the defining characteristics, or do you have examples of something that shows that it's really a strict superset and that it really.
Okay, so the use case is more in creating new entities, and you would never ask these questions in the case of individuals. In the case of individuals, you would.
Correct. Yeah.
You would question mark.
I wouldn't. No, this question makes no sense for an individual. I would ask a different question: is that how do I know it's this John Smith and not that John Smith?
But how do you know which questions to ask them, right?
No, I'm asking the user the question. I'm asking.
But how do you know which questions to? Oh, you're asking the user to say, how do you know this is the?
I'm asking the question of the user. The question is, what is the right distinguishing question?
Yeah, I think it's a bit premature. I think I know what you're hinting at.
Sorry, I'm not. The questions about premature are not valid on Fridays. Questions about so that are perfectly valid, but questions about premature are not valid on Friday.
That's true. That's true. But the so that would be so that better questions can be asked to the user in order to create new entities that disambiguate them from other entities. That would be a so that.
Yes.
Or one of the so that's at least that you came up
with
now. Yeah.
Yes.
Which I guess is a fair enough point, but it moves the problem to the user first. I mean, yeah, it assumes that the user needs to identify it as an individual or a class as well. Otherwise, it doesn't work, right? If the user doesn't. So in a way, you're asking the user to say which questions then to ask to the user. Yeah.
Well, which question to ask to the next user who has to make the distinction, right?
Yeah.
You've played the animals game. Like, I remember when I learned programming, there was this game about guess an animal, and oh, is it a whale? No. What animal did you think of? Camel. Oh, what's the difference between animal and camel? Whale lives in water. Okay, so next time you play, it's remembering that. Okay, what animal are you thinking of? Does it live in water? Oh, it's no. Oh, it's a camel. No, what animal did you think of? So you're basically asking the user to give distinguishing characteristics and to build the tree for you, so you can create this tree. Should have been a lattice.
Is this all
Okay.
the formal concept analysis of the link you sent?
The formal concept analysis is saying the questions form a lattice, not a tree. But yes, it's about saying any concept has distinguishing characteristics, and every distinguishing characteristic is a node in the lattice. And when you have multiple predicates, you get intersections, and you get narrower, more and more precise concepts as you determine many predicates. But in some cases, you do not determine a predicate. You can determine predicates in any order or not at all. So a concept is defined by the join of those predicates which you disambiguated so far. And
Is for the lattice, do I understand correctly that it basically doesn't have any transitive edges in the graph?
I don't think that's right, but I think I'll ask you to explain more, because I'm not sure I get you.
No, just if I understood correctly. Like I'm wondering like what kind of graph properties a lattice has.
A lattice has, normally in a real lattice, when you have two nodes, there's a meet and a join. There's a node, think of them as sets and union and intersection. It's really the easiest way to think of lattice. Like the union and intersection are defined for any two sets.
Yes.
So a lattice, the meet and the join are defined for any two nodes.
Okay, so union intersection, like set operations are one example of a lattice then?
Exactly.
Okay.
And associative lattices, which is the case I'm interested in, is actually maps fully. Like you can take any associative lattice and define a set whose union intersection will correspond to that lattice. But the feature analysis angle is that you can think of each node of the lattice as a predicate. And so whenever you're saying, things that follow this predicate and that predicate, well, that's the intersection. And now in that case, what's interesting is sometimes the meet, the intersection, is not defined sometimes, or it's empty if you prefer. And again, we're doing a kind of partial lattice, partially defined lattice, because we're saying sometimes it makes no sense to do intersection between those things because it's not there. There's intersection is null, and same with the meet. The union of those concepts, like Pair is the person and Pair is the city, is not a useful concept. So the join exists, but it's might as well not. Or the join is the universal join, right? All concepts, which is not a very useful concept. There's no join except the universal join.
Okay, that helped a bit. Thank you. Okay, yeah. Last thing is like, how would you summarize this whole call with 2 or 3 keywords? Because I'm trying to put keywords into the recording, so it's easier to find them.
Oh, okay. Well, the first part was very much about are the lattice operations defined on terms or meanings? And I think we pretty much decided they're working on they can work on entities probably without loss of generality, though it's still an open question, and I think an interesting one. Can we think of claim relations which are not bound to the underlying entity relations? I'm not sure, and that's definitely something.
Yeah, I think we have to.
we have to think about that.
Because of the use case of incremental formalization. But yeah, I mean, the implication otherwise would
that
be
way.
that the implication otherwise would be that you can only do it on claims by doing it by formalizing entities, which is something worthwhile exploring, to be honest.
Yeah.
Because if you
Okay, there I agree totally with you. It makes sense to define this on claims, but will it ever not be reducible to an entity relation? I doubt it. But
yeah,
that's also an interesting question.
That's a separate discussion. I mean, if you want to support
Yep.
incremental formalization, if you at any given point you want to have that state, the model needs to be supported.
I agree totally. It's a separate question, but it's the one I was asking.
Yeah,
and you asked another one, which is also valid. They're both important.
But I think it's a nice summary for today, because that's one thing. I mean, and I'm always pushing against formalization, but in this case, I'm not certain whether always doing it on a claim level would be beneficial. If you are differentiating, why not formalize that differentiation more than just on a claim level? So I do see some benefit there, except that I don't see it scale much beyond that, because it's going to get overly complicated.
And then we got into another discussion about, is the individual class distinction a fundamental entity in our model or not? I won't say this is resolved, by the way. I gave an argument. Is it strong enough? I'm not sure, but I gave an argument why it could be a useful distinction. But I'm still working on this one. I do think that the predicate is organized by the predicates have this lattice structure, and I'm still arguing for that. And I think that all the relations between definitions are reducible to the lattice relations. That's actually a claim I made. And that's for me an interesting confirmation that I could formalize that a bit. I don't know if it's that obvious that I formalized it, but it's what I was doing in this.
But isn't it basic predicate calculus?
Well, to a point, yeah, it is. I formalized it through basic predicate calculus, but I wanted to be sure. It's interesting that it can be done without negation. That surprised me. And I looked a bit at lattices with negation, but I'm not conclusive about that. And I was going to go into causal schema, epistemic schema, simile, and the base, but we didn't get into that.
Next Friday. So I think the title for now is, if you scroll up, up. Where is it?
No, it's very much basic constructs and the
predicates individuals.
That
classes,
was part 2.
Classes versus individuals. Classes / individuals, something along those lines.
That was part 2, yes. Part 1 was the lattice structure of predicates versus symbols, and part 2 was predicates versus individuals.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, it's I didn't get the keywords. So what I wrote down so far was individual versus class, but the one before I wasn't able to summarize in 1 or 2 words.
Is our distinction at the, where do distinctions apply? At the claim level, at the entity level, or at the term level? And we're kind of aiming at entities.
Okay, I just write down
distinctions
because distinctions.
Yeah.
Okay, I have distinctions, individual versus class. Anything else?
No, I think this covers it.
Okay, good. Then.
Thanks. I think I learned some stuff today.
Cool.
Good.
Me too. Thanks
Have
a lot.
Have a good one. Ciao,
See
ciao.
you. Bye.